18 and then 19 through 27 today, and then jump over to the book of John. And then we're going to be, the next couple weeks or whatever, we're going to go through John 11, 12, and 13. So I know we've kind of changed gears a little bit for how much we're trying to cover, and so it's been harder to know how to read ahead. But so John 11, 12, and 13, hopefully we'll get to some of that today, but that's where we'll be moving forward for a little bit. All right, so the last thing that we read was, Peter, that it was talking about the rich guy selling everything. Peter's like, we've lost everything. And Jesus said, great is the reward for those who do. And then Jesus told them, like, the whole cross thing, and they all didn't, it was hidden from them. They heard it, but they didn't hear it. So we're starting in verse 35. Anybody have a name that they have heard or have learned about this person we're about to read of? Like, as you talk about them or as you reference them?
Blind Bartimaeus.
Blind Bartimaeus. Isn't that a terrible name? Because who is he really? Like, faith-filled, no longer blind.
Yeah.
Bartimaeus. Like, I saw the name, I was like, oh yeah, blind Bartimaeus. And I was like, ugh, I don't want to say that. I'm not going to call him that anymore. I don't like that. So verse 35, as Jesus was approaching Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the road begging. Now hearing a crowd going by, he began to inquire who this was. They told him it was Jesus of Nazareth. So he called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Those who led the way were sternly telling him to be quiet. Remember what we read about not too long ago, about someone reaching out to Jesus and people sternly warning them? Who was the group of people that were trying to be near Jesus? Kids, right? And everyone's like, hey, this is serious. So now there's a sick person. Hey, this is serious. Quit bugging Jesus. So people sternly warned him, don't. Lord, help us. Help us not to sternly warn the people that need Jesus the most. What the heck? And Jesus stopped and commanded that he be brought to him. And when he came near, he questioned him, what do you want me to do for you? And he said, Lord, isn't that interesting? How many times did Jesus ask that question? What do you want me to do? And when he asked, wasn't it always obvious? And the crippled man came to Jesus, and Jesus said, what would you like me to do? And the man paralyzed from birth came to Jesus, and what would you like? And the blind man, and the deaf man, and what do you mean, what do I want you to do? There's something to that question, I think. We have talked about in the past the guy at the pool. There's no one to take me to the pool when the water stirs, and Jesus says, do you want to be made well? And he was kind of talking about like no one will help me and everyone gets in the way. And I think that if nothing else, part of the reason why, and I think there's more to it than this, but part of the reason why is Jesus is always addressing more than the practical need, than the physical thing that's there. Now, I want to be careful because there are moments in Scripture where I think external circumstances affect sickness that is there. But there are also scriptures where people assume that that's true, and Jesus says has nothing to do with sin, has nothing to do with external circumstance. And so, but when Jesus is speaking to someone about does that make sense what I've said so far?
Yes.
Okay, I don't want to. If you say sin is the reason why all sickness exists, you're basically right. In the context of Adam's sin and the fall, that is true. If you say this person is sick because of their sin, it is possible that their sin has impacted or created sickness in their life. That is absolutely possible and scripturally true, that it could be true. It is also possible that that person is experiencing sickness and has nothing to do with their sin. So that's the point that I'm trying to make. Everybody good with that? Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, emotional outbursts concerning that? Okay, so when Jesus is speaking to someone who has a physical ailment, I think there's the reality of that there may be something else going on, but not always that. But I think in addition to, and maybe I would even go so far as to say more importantly, Jesus cares about the person as a whole. We talk about the mind, will, emotion, the soul, plus the spirit, plus the body. And so I think when Jesus is asking these questions, in part, he's addressing the person, not the sickness. Is that maybe an okay way to say it?
Yes.
Thanks, Josh. That's really helpful. And so what do you want me to do for you? And he said, Lord, I want to regain my sight. And again, remember we talked to the rich guy last week? Good teacher, tell me what to do. And Jesus is like, good is for God. Like, are you willing to call me God? And he's like, just tell me how, like, stuff to do. Like, he was unwilling to meet him on this level. Bartimaeus, when he's speaking to Jesus, he's affirming, son of David, his lineage. This is obviously extremely important in Jewish context. But then he says, Lord, I want to regain my sight. So he's differing from the rich guy. He is confessing, he is professing who Jesus is, not just what he wants from him, not just information, not just healing. He wants him to be Lord. Does this distinction make sense? I think it's good to see those differences there. And Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has made you well. Your what?
Faith.
Your what?
Faith.
Your faith has made you well.
Do you think part of the question in 41 is in some ways to see his, like, because he's crying out for Jesus, and then Jesus stops, and then he's like, what do you want? Is it revealing his faith? You know what I mean? Is it seeing it, like, if he believes that Jesus can?
Because he asks for mercy,
right?
And when Jesus comes to him, okay, mercy, in what form?
Right. It's almost like this faith is being drawn out of him.
Right. Because he believes that he is, believes that he can,
right.
And he's asking for, because that's the pisteo, the belief, faith, how the relation between those words. I mean, it's the same Greek word, but go ahead and let that's stirring inside of you come out. I think you're right, Tim. I think there's something to it of, and like I was talking about somebody yesterday I was talking to, there was a moment that I was praying for them that I felt the Lord said, now they have to pray.
Yeah.
Like you've prayed for them and that's good, but now they have to pray. Right. They have to be a part of this too. Right. And it's the faith of them matter too.
It'd be almost like you're praying for them and you ask them the question, like, what do you want? And all of a sudden they're like, I want to be free. And this faith is right, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In themselves. I think that there's a part of that too. So good.
Yeah, and I think, Lord, let that shape us appropriately as we minister to people, as we pray for people, that to not be, because there's always ditches, and I know I talk about this, maybe too much, but it's like, if I don't pray for them, it won't work. That's not good.
Right.
If they don't have faith, it won't work. That's not true either. And so, but because there's scripture that proves that both of those things are not the case. But both are good. Both are good. That's the better way. Yeah, that's good.
And then he commends him for it.
Yeah. Jesus, receive your sight. Your faith has made you well. Immediately regained his sight and began following him, glorifying God. And when all the people saw it, they gave praise to God too. Pretty cool story of not blind Bartimaeus, of seeing Bartimaeus.
Amen.
Faith-filled, seeing Bartimaeus.
That's so healthy, bro.
Dude, Gary got me for that.
That's a healthy way to put it.
Gary texted me after my sermon on Sunday, because I shared with people, I said, I have diabetes. And he goes, Gary texted me, he goes, no, say not you have diabetes, say I'm fighting against diabetes. Or,
that's why I've been trying to be careful of that too. I'm wrestling with melanoma. Yeah. I don't want to say I have it.
Yeah, or it's mine.
Yeah,
I am this. So good.
Someday I'm going to be seeing Bartimaeus.
Amen.
Chapter 19. He entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man called by the name of Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. It's interesting. There's a lot of that going on in this story. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was and was unable because of the crowd, for he was small in stature. So you might say he was a wee little man. If you grew up in church, there's a song that says Zacchaeus was a wee little man. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree in order to see him, for he was about to pass through that way. It's funny, some Bible stories, it's so ingrained in my mind like a kid's song. It's so hard for me to see it as an adult. I can't help but see it as the 4 or 6-year-old me. So he ran on ahead. So Zacchaeus is an outcast according to the Jews. Yes, he's a tax collector. He's a chief tax collector. So he is in relationship with Rome to the detriment of his Jewish brothers and sisters. And he's short. So he wants to see Jesus, but you can't really go in a crowd because someone might accidentally give you an elbow and be happy about it. And you're not tall, so you can't stand in the back. So he's got to find a way to see Jesus. And so he plans ahead and he climbs a tree so that when Jesus passes, he'll be able to see him. When Jesus came to the place where the tree was, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So Zacchaeus is not a desirable person according to everything that we understand. He's dishonest. He's a betrayer of his own people. He is assisting a foreign government in their land. He's not a good dude. He's not a good dude. And he's been doing it so long and so well that he's been promoted. So Jesus sees him and says, today I must stay at your house. Isn't that interesting? And so he hurried and came down and received him gladly. When they saw it, so again, this guy has robbed them. This guy has betrayed them. This guy is related to some of them. This guy is a bad guy. and rightfully called one. He's not a good person. He's lived and benefited from their pain. And so Jesus says, I have to stay at your house. Zacchaeus, of course, is like, sweet. Like, there's nothing hard for him at this point. Like, the one that he was just trying to see talked to him and said, I'm going to go to your house. So this is good news for him. But the rest of the Jews who have been on the receiving end of this guy's abuse and manipulation through relationship, they're upset. When they saw it, they all began to grumble, saying, he is gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. So they're already angry at the guy, and now they're angry at Jesus. And we see throughout Scripture, as Jesus spends time with sinners, it is often that people question his deity, question his commitment to God because of these things. But I also love, and I know I've talked about this recently, but Jesus was invited into the homes of sinners. If we're wrestling to get sinners to have a conversation with us or come to our church, there's room for growth for us. That he was so effective that even the lost said, I want to hear more. Then Jesus shows up. Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, half of my possessions I'll give to the poor. So Jesus hasn't asked him to do anything. Some of this may be that Zacchaeus knows, I am wealthy because I have robbed from my fellow man. But also there's something about Jesus that is causing Zacchaeus to start to make some pretty radical proclamations. Half of what I have, I'm going to give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything. So now he's speaking to not just what he has, but these people that he's wronged. And so what does he mean by defraud?
Stealing.
Right, but what would be a context for how that could have happened?
Being dishonest with taxes.
Right.
Taking the cream off
So,
the top.
yeah. So Rome has taxes. That's not odd. And if you're a tax collector, that's messed up because they're using the fact that you know the names and the families and what they do to make sure that Rome gets their fair share of whatever percentage they've chosen. But tax collectors often, culturally we know, made money by taking a little bit extra, skimming some off the top, and then giving Rome what they're required and keeping the rest for them. So he hasn't done something illegal by collecting taxes, but he has done something immoral by using his relationship with the Jewish people to help collect taxes. But in addition to that, if he took extra, now it's illegal and immoral. And so that's what he's speaking to. If I've defrauded anyone of anything, for anything that I took above and beyond what I was supposed to, I will give back 4 times as much as I took. How much Zacchaeus will have left after giving half to the poor and 4 times to whatever he took from others, it's going to put a dent. I mean, this is a significant thing that he's doing. What's the difference between him and the rich guy?
He was willing to give up everything.
Willingness.
The rich guy, sell everything, give it to the poor, left. Zacchaeus, not unprompted, gives half to the poor and uses the rest to make right where he's been wrong. Pretty radical difference.
It's so interesting too, just the order of those two stories.
Yeah.
Like how will anyone be saved? With the rich young ruler, and then you
Like
see,
this.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah. Yeah, how can anyone be saved? It's easier for, a camel to pass the eye of a needle. Gosh, that sounds impossible, 2 minutes later. So here's a guy who's really rich who comes into the kingdom of heaven. Josh?
But also it's like a picture of the future too, and what ultimately is going to be at the end of time, like where Jesus comes back, and even then people will still say no. Like, so it's almost like a foreshadowing too. They can choose or not. Like,
It's amazing how blind we can be.
yeah.
Choose to be. Kaylee?
I think it's also interesting, like the rich young ruler, he may have been more inclined to hold on to his money because he didn't feel like he wronged anyone by having money. And so it's like almost like an entitlement or an extra layer of pride of like, well, this is my, and I deserve it. So why would I ever give it?
Yeah, that's really good, Kayleen. Because the difference between Zacchaeus and the rich young ruler is the rich young ruler was religiously good.
Yeah.
Zacchaeus, everybody knew, including Zacchaeus, he wasn't good. And so sometimes our belief in our own efforts, our own works, can be more of a stumbling block than our sin. Yeah, that's really good. And Jesus said to him, "Today, salvation has come to this house." We've talked about before, the oikos, the Zacchaeus' choice is not just impacting him but others. It's his family. It's those who work for him. And if you're that kind of wealthy, you've got a lot of people in your household. And so his radical salvation impacted a lot of people. It's very cool. Because he too is a son of Abraham. Zacchaeus, half to the poor, 4 times to his fellow man. As a whole and then relationally. Jesus said, salvation has come to you into your house. And then he affirms what? He is a son of Abraham. What is he speaking to there? Why is that statement important?
The lineage and just,
He's a Jew.
Yeah.
Jesus is calling him a Jew. What would every Jew call him? Not a Jew.
a Gentile.
They don't want to welcome him into that because he betrayed them. Like, he literally used his position as a Jew against Jews. Like, I know it's an awful story, but it's like that's like a Jewish person selling out other Jews in the Holocaust. Like, it's a wicked idea. Like, that you're part of what's happening, but instead of you enduring what others are enduring, you're using, like, that's ugly. That's really ugly. But he says, he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. I think my ability to assume and see God's grace for people sometimes is impacted far too much by what interactions I've had with them or what I believe they have done, how bad I believe it to be. There's some people that I have great grace for and excited about them coming to know Jesus. And if I'm honest, there's some people that I wrestle with the idea of them coming to Jesus. Because it's either how could they possibly change, or someone like that, are they too far gone? And Jesus really smashes that here. If there was ever a person who couldn't be redeemed, it's this guy. And Jesus says he has been, and he's a part of this family. And then the conversation continues. While they were listening to these things, Jesus went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem, and they supposed that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. What does that statement tell us? Go ahead, Dan.
They thought that he was going to establish his kingdom
When?
right then.
So we know that he said, I have to be killed. I'll come back 3 days later. They didn't, it was hidden from them. There's a lot of things hidden from me too. But the idea that they had was what? That Jesus would come into Jerusalem and what's everyone thinking of at that moment? Who is he going to defeat?
The
Romans, yeah. Is that what we said? Yeah, so
Roman scum.
yeah, the Roman scum. So the establishment of the kingdom, what kingdom were they thinking of? Israel, yeah, their country. And so in order for this kingdom to be established and to reign, the people who are occupying it have to be kicked out, and then it becomes... So they were looking at King David, Jericho, bad guys kicked out, good guys established, strong kingdom built up, strong military force, right? Why would they picture that? I kind of just alluded to it. Because what they've seen before. Yes? You ever done that? God is going to move, and I know how. Because looking to the past, I insert what I've experienced or seen into this situation.
Yes, I've done that.
Yeah, me too. You ever been praying for someone or talking to someone or ministering to or discipling someone, and you know exactly how God is going to work out their situation? And then later, turns out it wasn't exactly what we knew. It was something very different. It is so important to remember and to honor and to allow the past to build faith in us and trust in us and allow it to teach us about God and his way and his heart. But we have to be really careful also not to look at the past to determine exactly what the future looks like. Because he's a God who never changes, but he's also extremely, profoundly, endlessly creative, and he does all things well. And even in my own life, I feel like if I'm fasting or if I'm, going through a season of whatever, where he's calling me to slow down, or he's calling me to spend time doing something that I've done before that has, brought change to my life, I have to be careful to be like, okay, I know what you're getting ready to do. All right, so now because then when I know, I'm using that word loosely, I hope you understand that when I know what God is going to do, what am I looking at? The thing that I know God is going to do. So my gaze is narrowed in a way. If I'm ministering to a person and I had a story like theirs and God did this and this and this in my life, and their story is like mine, so he's going to do this and this and this in the same order in their life, where am I looking? At that. What can I possibly miss when I am staring or focused on something so specific?
Everything.
Yeah, literally anything.
Well, every other possibility. So maybe the better way for me to be is like, hey, their story is like my story. And God did these really cool things in my life, and it changed everything, and now I get to walk with him, and I'll never be the same again. God can do that for them too. He will change their life and do these really cool things in their life, and they'll never be the same again. But how that works and in what order that works
Good word.
could be totally different. I think sometimes, especially in the context of discipleship, sorry to stay on this tangent, but I think it's important. In the context of discipleship, as we're helping people, as we're walking with people, we need to be really careful not to try to shove the person through our story. Because it could look totally different. And if we say, for me, this was the most important thing at first, so when that broke, everything else broke. And so when you meet with someone else, all right, let's go after this. Did God say that? Or is that your story? And so was it wrong for them to believe that Jesus would establish a kingdom? No. Are they saying Jesus is the one who will establish? There's an honor, there's a desire, there's a history that they're referring to. They're not making it up in their own imagination. There's There's a history that they're looking to, but there's so many holes and spaces in what they do and don't understand that they fill it with their own ideas, their own timeline, their own context, their own enemy, their own victory, their own kingdom. And what was the truth of what Jesus did when he established the kingdom? It wasn't just about Israel. It wasn't just about this Jerusalem. It was about like souls forever. It was an eternal kingdom. It was heaven here. It was way cooler. So dare I say, when we determine ahead of time what it will and won't look like, in what order and what manner it takes place, it's possible that we're missing a way cooler answer than we could even.
It's good.
Can I add something?
Please do.
It's like, I don't normally have the language, but I'm going to try it. I feel like even in the discipleship context, it's like look, it's looking for him, and like when you are just trying to solve the problem or solve them as a problem, like you start looking at like how it worked for you or how it should work for them. But if you can see Jesus in their story, or celebrate and acknowledge when they're hearing from God, or if God shows them something, and like you don't get ahead of it, like I don't know, like you don't think you know better than him.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, Jesus is talking to you about this, and like celebrate where God is speaking and working in their life.
Yeah.
And then like, because I feel like I've done it before, where it's like, oh, I feel like it should be like this, or the breakthrough should come this way, or it should come in this time. And I think you can even leave the person feeling discouraged, or even like they're not even hearing from God. And it's like, no, like maybe Jesus is showing up to them as like the shepherd. He's going to walk them from, the dry, like dusty field, to that green pasture, and that might take some time. Or maybe he's showing up to them as like the lion who's going to just like roar the enemy away in a moment. Or, but it's like, how is Jesus revealing himself to them? And like, wow, just like celebrate that and encourage that.
Yeah.
And like let Jesus be who he is.
Yeah.
Like he's the one, like who's seeking and saving the lost. He's the one, and we get to partner in his work in that person's life. But yeah, it's in the same way where in our personal journeys, like instead of like looking at our past or history, I think in the same way, like when we're leading others and discipling others, like not like losing sight of him as well in someone else's story. Does that make sense?
Oh, it's really good, Andrew.
Right, Brendo?
That's really good. Yeah, I mean, and it's
True.
like we've talked about this some recently too. That like, if our aim is to have someone pray a prayer, we might get them to pray the prayer, but they didn't meet Jesus, But our hope is that they would actually meet Jesus, and so it's never our heart, but that's where sometimes we come into like sin management stuff. It's like, how do we help you manage this thing that you're wrestling with, instead of like, look at him, like what is he saying, what is he doing, where is he? That's so good. And I think that piece that you mentioned too is so important, Andrew, of like, what's he talking to you about? Because it may be something that's not even on my radar or experience, where God not only is going to be setting them free and calling them into this new season that I didn't see coming, sure, but in their answer, it teaches me and helps me to see something that it's a new cool thing for me too. And when we look at like the pot that we have of information, knowledge, experience, whatever, and we assume it comes from there, there's almost kind of an undertone of, well, certainly I know, but I just don't know which one it is that I know that is the answer. It's like, maybe I don't know. Maybe it's something even, yeah.
It's so interesting, because I feel like so often we always, unless the Lord gives us revelation, like we see above the ground. So maybe I see the fruit of this in this person's life. Maybe I'll just use maybe they're struggling with alcoholism, and I see this thing, and I'm discipling them, and I'm like, man, this is what we need to go after right now. Like this is, but it's like God speaking to them about this wound they received from their coach when they were this old, and I'm like, who cares about that? You know, like let's deal with this alcohol thing. It's very like right in your face, but you never know, because so often this thing might stem from something that took place in their life years back, or from this place that you didn't even see. And so like what you said, Andrew, about trusting that he knows best, I think is so good, because he sees everything. And so being like laying down what I think I know just because I see with my natural eyes. And God can give us insight or revelation. And that's his heart. We want that.
But there's a really big difference between him saying,
correct,
this is what's happening, and us determining based on what we've, and again, you don't fail to celebrate what God has done in your life or the testimonies or the stories of others. I hope I'm not saying anything that sounds like that.
No.
But we allow it to, wow, God, you really can move, and you really do care, and in the small things, and you see further than we do. And so I believe you, and that whatever is going on here and whatever you're wanting to do here, you can, and you want to, and you will. And so we're looking to you. And that's very different than the bag of tricks that I know based on those things.
So good.
Yeah. So I don't say this to pick on the Jewish people had this picture in their mind. I think it's possible to do. It's I think relatively easy to do if we're not paying attention.
No, you just picked on us.
Well, I was talking about myself. If you're feeling conviction, Lord, let them have it in Jesus' name. Get them. And so they thought it was going to happen in verse 12. So nobleman went, all of it's good. A nobleman went to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself and then returned. So now we're getting ready to read some. Anybody remember the 10 talents, 5 talents, and 1? 2? Is it 1? Yeah. This is not the same one. This is different. It's not, because sometimes in Scripture you'll hear 2 stories from 2 different people, and they might emphasize or share a different part of it, so it sounds a little bit different. This is not the same one. This is different. So let's look at it with fresh eyes. And he gave them 10 minas and said to them, do business with this until I come back. But his citizens, now listen to this, but his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. A lordship issue. When he returned, after receiving the kingdom, so there was a kingdom that a nobleman was sent to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself and then return. What is the imagery what are we talking about? What's the analogy that Jesus is making? This is for himself, right? There is a keys to a kingdom. When he returned after receiving the kingdom, he ordered that the slaves to whom he had given the money be called to him so that he might know what business they had done. What have you done with what I have given you? The first appeared saying, Master, your mina has been made into 10 minas more. So, he says, this is yours, and what you gave me has been made into more. And he said to him, well done, good slave, because you have been faithful in a very little thing. He turned 1 into 10, and he said, you've been faithful in a what? In a what? A very little thing. Isn't that interesting language?
Yes.
He didn't say, wow, 10? What? He didn't take away from what he was saying, but he said, this is a little thing that I've given you. You've been faithful in this little thing. What does the Bible talk about being faithful in little things? Faithful in much. Well done, good slave. Because you've been faithful in a very little thing, you are to be in authority over 10 cities. And the second came saying, your mina, master, has been made into 5. And he said to him, also, you're to be over 5 cities. Another came saying, Master, here is your mina, which I kept put away in a handkerchief. For I was afraid of you, because you are an exacting man, and you take up what you did not lay down, and you reap what you did not sow. I want to speak to something that I think is really important, and not for the sake of being critical, but because I think it is a critical point. When our view of Jesus and when our view of a Christian life is to be afraid of God and emphasize our own inability to do anything because of our fear of Him, justifying the lack of change in our life, the lack of fruit in our life, the lack of impact in the world around us, we are like this servant. It does not honor Him to say, I'm very afraid of Him. Who am I to speak out? It does not honor Him to say He's very scary and He's God and I'm just nothing. I'm a worm who can do nothing good, and so I'm not even going to put myself in a position where I potentially dishonor His name, and I'm going to just try to get through and grovel with my face as close to the ground for as long as I can without making any kind of impact, without saying any kind of thing that would stir anything that I could potentially do wrong, because He is scary. That makes us like this one. Let's look what he says. He said to him, by your own words I will judge you, you worthless slave. Did you not know that I'm an exacting man, taking up what I did not lay down and reaping what I did not sow? Then why did you not put the money in the bank, and having come, I would have collected it with interest? Then he said to the bystanders, take the mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10. And they said to him, Master, he has 10 minas already. So now we see, and we're going to see more about the one who did nothing. Jesus says, or the noble one, obviously, take the one that he has, give it to the one who has 10. People are upset by this. Why?
Thought it wasn't fair.
Say it again louder.
They thought it wasn't fair.
It wasn't fair. Did you know if the gifts and the callings and the opportunities that God gives to you to honor Him, to step out, to serve people, to whatever, you will grow in those areas? Did you know also, as you grow in those areas, God will give other opportunities, other areas for you to serve and honor Him in your life that you didn't have when you started? It's not about those things. But I'm telling you, as you honor Him, as you say yes to the doors that He opens, the places that He calls, as you use wisely to honor Him, that which He has given you, He will give you more. Why? Because you've been faithful in a little bit, you'll be faithful in more. So as He gives you more, you will walk in more, which will be multiplied more, which will honor Him more, and He'll give you more. And if someone standing from the outside looking in is going to say, look at all that God has given them, and He's given me only this, so I will stay here with this one thing, angry, placing myself in a place of judgment against God and against this person who's had it so easy, given so much, when everything is so hard for me. What do we miss when that's our perspective? If they've been given much that they're being faithful in, where did they begin? In little. If you're new to walking with Him, if you're new in the context of this room, we're ministers, either vocationally in a context of an internship or potentially vocationally in the future. If you're new to this journey and you stare at someone who's been doing this longer than you and it feels like they've been given an unfair advantage of God's help and wisdom and perspective that you don't have, I promise you they didn't start with it. They started like you started. And what did they do? They trusted Him and they were faithful with what was given to them. And then what happened next? He multiplied it and He gave them more. And then what did they do? They were faithful for what they were given, and then they walked into more. Trust Him with what He's given you. Honor Him with what He's given you. Don't get bitter. Don't get discouraged when you look at someone else and it looks like they can do something that you can't, or that they have more than you have. That is a wrong perspective. That makes us like these bystanders who were offended at what Jesus wanted to do. If you've been given little and He did something through it, you know it was His grace. if it's multiplied in your life and you're able to walk in something in a greater measure than you used to, you know it's His grace. So the one with 10 understands why they're over 10 cities. Why? By the grace of the master. What did they do? They multiplied 1 mina into 10. That doesn't get you a city. That doesn't get you like a block. But it was their faithfulness in what was given that they did that gave them more. So if you've been given much and it's been multiplied in your life, you know it's the grace of God. If you're looking at someone else and comparing what they do or what God's given them compared to what you have or what you've been given, you're missing the whole point of what this is. What I've been given, what am I supposed to do with it? Be faithful. Be faithful. Why? Because of the master that I serve. And it's His. So why would I treat it any way other than with honor and respect and with diligence? And when He gives you more, you'll look at the more and be like, man, you're so good. You're so gracious to me. You've done so much. Lord, thank you. I know this is your grace. This is your mercy. This is your goodness. This isn't me. This is you. "26, I tell you that everyone who has, more shall be given. But the one who does not have, and even what he has, shall be taken away." Now listen to the last part of this. "But these enemies of mine, who do not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slay them in my presence." This is clearly talking about a kingdom that is established in Christ's death and resurrection, but also a returning king who will come when He establishes the ultimate kingdom where there's no more sin, no more sorrow, no more pain. I mean, we could study this short passage for years. I mean, there's so much good stuff in here. But in part, what Jesus is talking about is between the cross and the returning king. Who lives in that span of time in this room? All of us. So He's talking about us. So my encouragement to you is ask the question, Lord, what's the mina you've given me? Help me to be faithful. But before we get to that point, like the first couple verses, Lord, if there's anything in me that doesn't want you to rule over me, I don't want that. I want you to rule. I want you to be the king. I'm honored to be your servant. But let me be faithful with the very little that you give me, that you would be honored. And as you give more, let me be faithful with the more that you give me. It's not just a story. I mean, there really is an application here. There's a thoughts?
It's really good and convicting in my life.
I also, oh, sorry, Tim, were you talking?
Go ahead.
I also think the handkerchief, like covering the mina, like it's almost like they didn't want to mess it up. You know, like they put in a handkerchief to cover it, to protect it. Like, so we get this awesome gift, right? And like we think we're doing it justice by not using it or doing anything with it, and yet here He is saying, no, like you've been unfaithful. Like, so your crutch of not even showing that mina to anyone, like it's not right. Like the crutch that he said, I don't want to mess this up, I don't want to lose it, like, has been wrong. And how many
And it's not even,
Christians-
I don't want to lose it. It's, I don't want to use it.
Right.
I don't want to use it improperly. And how many times have we heard people in the church, Christian people that we love, or even ourselves,
Right.
I'm not going to step out. I'm not going to use what I've been given
Right.
because I don't want to screw it up.
Like,
And then we call it honor because he's God.
Right.
And we make it sound like we've done this good thing. Like somehow that's humility. Like somehow that's honoring God. Like somehow that's the good way to do things. That God's like, oh, dang, you're humble. Like you don't even use what I've given you. No, like he's angry.
Like, how many people in his church are paralyzed with one mina right now?
Right?
That's,
You know, like,
I
if
mean,
you really think about it,
Yeah.
that's they receive salvation, they receive their mina, and they're paralyzed with it.
Yeah. And I think, Josh, part of that is this, what we're talking about, and that we need to use what we've been given, faithful in the little that we've been given. But part of it, too, is there's a narrative in the church where even leadership in the church says, you know, look at this shiny silk handkerchief that I keep my mina in. Like,
That's good too.
you, too, can keep your mina safe.
Right.
Because he's scary.
Right.
He's God. He's scary. We don't want to make him angry. We don't want to disappoint him. We don't want to, we don't want to do something we're not supposed to do. So let's read about other people who did things. Let's talk about other people who did things. But let's keep and it's almost like we've encouraged and created, like we've called it good. Sorry, Tim, you were getting ready to say something too?
no, you don't need to apologize. It's so good. It's just challenging. I mean, it's wild even to think, like, within this, there's, don't compare yourselves one to another. Because what if you're the one with 10 or the one with 5 and you're like, oh, I'm doing good,
Right.
you know? And you're looking over at this person with 1 and you've been given 10. And in a sense, maybe you're putting 9 in a handkerchief.
Yeah, that's really
It's
good.
It's like with the capacity, with what God has given you, like, are you being faithful in, like, your life personally before the Lord?
Yeah.
No one else knows. You know, in some aspects.
Yeah, it's
like,
between you and God.
it's between you and God.
You're right.
And it's like, are you saying everything I want to run it as hard as I can for you? And then there's also, like, it's challenging. In verse 27, the ones that he slays, right? Are those the ones
That's
that-
verse 14.
What?
That's verse 14.
The 20, right?
The citizens.
Yeah, the citizens that he slays.
Yeah, read verse 14.
Verse 14. Let's see.
But
But his citizens hated him and sent delegations after him, saying, "We do not want this man to reign over us." So they're the ones.
It's the end caps to
Right.
27 and 14.
Right.
The citizens are different than the slaves.
Right.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, so the one that put his in the handkerchief, you don't think that's one that was slayed? That's what I'm.
It doesn't expressly say, but it sure kind of seems to tie it to that point
That's what I was wondering.
of like,
Well, a slave would still be a citizen.
right. But there's a distinction between. He called 10 of his slaves and gave them 10 minas and said to them, "Do business with us until I come back." But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him. So it's a different group of people.
I thought that interesting too.
We do not want this man to reign over us. But when he returned, he ordered the slaves. So again, back to the people he talked about in verse 13,
Right.
to see what business they had done. And then he said to the bystanders, so these are not the other slaves, "Take the mina away from him and give it to the one who had the 10 minas." And they said to him, the bystanders said to him, "Master, he has 10 minas already. I tell you that everyone who has more will be given, and he even who, but from the one who does not have." And so again, the word "have" there, it's clearly not talking about just what you've been given; it's what you're doing with what you've been given. Because he did have 1 mina, and it was taken from him. So it wasn't that he didn't have it; it was that he didn't do something with it.
Right.
So if I have nothing, whatever I have been given, like, it will be taken and.
And then it's almost like he says the very next line, "But these enemies have
Yeah, so it doesn't expressly say, for sure, but even in the word when there's "but," that indicates a change of focus or attention. So I think plainly we know for sure verse 27 is talking about verse 14.
Yeah.
For sure we know that.
Yeah.
We also know there's other characters in this story that are not the wicked ones.
Right.
or the 10 slaves. So,
Regardless.
because there's the bystanders and the ones who took it. So
Yeah.
it's not everyone,
Yeah.
but there's certainly something that's happening there that's pretty radical.
Yeah.
I also find it interesting, like the word slaves that he used, like, and Paul references us as being slaves to Christ,
Yeah, doulos,
you
yeah.
know, all throughout. And so, like, I don't know, like, is he referring to them as being tested in their faith in this story? Is that, like, does that correlate?
Yeah, the Greek word for slave is the word doulos, and a lot of times that word is translated servant, and it's really only translated servant because slave to us in English has a connotation, or some other languages too, that is different than the slavery of this time.
Right.
So you give yourself, like, so Teresa and I and our kids, we have nothing, and so we've traveled to this land, and we come to this wealthy person, and we say, I submit myself, I'm giving my life to be a part of your home. So when it talks about the household, it includes those who were, oikos again is the word that's used for that. So you're saying, I'll be under your roof, I'll be under your care, I'll be under your protection, and in exchange for that, I'm giving you. And a lot of times they were for periods of time, sometimes it was for life. So, like that picture, like my life is not my own. It's his. And so that word slave is the right word. It is the direct translation. But I think the version of slavery that's existed in America and other places
Right.
is not the version that was here.
Right.
And
I that wasn't
But it's not just
That
like,
was my
it's not like
reference.
guy who works for me. It's
Right.
not saying that.
right.
It is slave,
Yeah.
but it's just not.
Yeah, and that was not my intention to have that reference as it just bond servant, you know, like
Yeah.
is more of a term that I would, you know, stay tied into these two stories.
Sure.
But I just know that Paul references us as
Yeah.
slaves to Christ.
And we are.
And that just
Yeah, because we're either a slave to Christ or a slave to sin.
Right.
So we've either given our life to one or to the other. Kayleen, did you have your hand up?
I was gonna add on to what Josh was saying a while ago about the handkerchief that was
Yeah,
covering.
go ahead if you'd like.
So I think like another aspect of that, like when you are afraid of God or you don't see God rightly, like you might be ashamed of the things that He's giving you, and so like you try and hide them from other people, or you
That's
don't
good.
see them as valuable enough to share with them.
It's really good. Anya, did you have something?
Yeah, I just, as we were talking just about like, I think Tim brought it up just about how it's easy to look at the person who has 10 when you have 5 and just be like, well, where's the rest of mine? You know, and I just feel like in so many of these passages, like even the end of Luke 18, like going into like 19, the word see is like referenced so much, especially, you know, in the story of where Jesus heals Bartimaeus, but like even like in 19 where it talks about Zacchaeus, like Zacchaeus climbed the tree to see him.
Yeah.
And so I just think even in that, like if we would just see who we're pursuing, like rightly, we wouldn't look at the things of the world and say, I lack.
Yeah.
And I just think we would look at His grace and say, wow.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think even in this, it's an invitation to see
Yeah.
rightly. Like, of course, like all of His parables are, but, you know, but if there's something really, like, I think intrinsically deep about it, that He's inviting
So
people
good.
to come and see, like, there is no lack in me, no matter what you have, no matter what you've been given to steward, and no matter what is reproduced in your life, it's because of me.
Yeah.
Like, it's because you see me. So,
So good, Anya. And I think the disciples and the authors of the New Testament, they modeled what you're saying really well. Like Paul had maybe more education, more prestige. He traveled further than a lot of the other disciples. But there was never like a sense of, and because of that, I'm kind of the coolest one. Like he even like spoke about himself, like I'm the least of these guys. And so their connection with each other, or even like I'm baptized by Paul, I'm baptized by Apollos. They're saying like, stop it, like that's not a thing. Like that's, so their talents, so to speak, differed from each other, but all of them were captivated by the grace of God who would call us to be a part of His good work, not comparing, like you said. They weren't seeing and looking and staring at each other and themselves and each other and themselves. They were staring at Him
yeah.
into wherever and however He called them. And so like they were able to be like the ones who turned the world upside down
Yeah.
as they stared at him and he had his way. And yeah, if you're a scholar and you study how many words did Peter use versus Paul, Paul had a way bigger vocabulary than Peter. And yet God still managed to use them both and miraculous, you know what I mean? Like,
So right.
so even the stuff that we would compare, like, is that where our hope and strength is anyhow?
God moved.
Yeah.
And it just like, I mean, I'm telling on myself a little bit, and that's okay, because God's healed me and continuing to heal me. But like, even just like, if I saw like through my lens a lack, I would let other people's words, even if they weren't even talking about me, add on and like heap up like shame in a way to where like, see, you don't have that, like, see, you don't have that. And I think it's because like I was pursuing so many different avenues. I would stretch myself thin to learn this and learn that and learn that. And I've got a good mind, like I can learn things really well. And so but it was not unto something that was him.
That's good.
And so I think like that's the whole point like of all of this. Like
Look at him.
to look at him
Yeah.
and to see him.
So good, Anya.
And I just love seeing just like the word see like all throughout this, because it's like just see, behold, like look upon his face, like he'll burn it up.
And even the riches piece, because that's the other kind of theme that's, what's the riches represent?
Yeah.
The world, like you were saying, that what is it that we're measuring? What is it that we're looking for?
Exactly.
Is it riches? Sure, yeah, we can use it to help these people. Great. But like that's not my identity. Like I found Jesus. Like salvation's come to my house. Like I'm in the family again. Yeah, take the money, whatever. Like yeah, that's really good. I mean, they sound like a bunch of just short stories that are like weirdly put together, but they're not. Like even as we started like 15, 16, hasn't there been so many themes through all of this that like keeps jumping back? And I think that C one that's a great observation, a really good observation. Well, guys, I think that's a good spot for us to stop. Starting next week, we're going to be in John. We're going to kind of work our way through 11, 12, 13. And then we've got a couple different chapters in Matthew and Mark that are kind of happening simultaneously that we'll go to after that. But I think John 11, 12, 13 would be a cool place to go next. So